Hi, I'm Ali Board and I'm very pleased to bring you the latest colour in my watercolour paint collection. The star of the show today is going to be Quinacridone Magenta. And I, unsurprisingly, am going to be painting a flamingo. What better subject to show off this beautiful pink colour? But I'm going to go for some drama as well. So shall I take you through where I've got to and how we're going to proceed? I've sketched out my flamingo onto my watercolour paper, and the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to use a black sketching pen to get some of the detail in so that when I do go all dramatic with the colour, all of that drawing is kept safe and underneath anything that I layer on the top. So this is a waterproof sketching pen. It's a 0.4, but anything medium-sized will be fine. And I'm going to go over the features of my flamingo so that that pink really shines. Let's start with this beautiful beady eye. So I'm going to go in with my pen, make sure that's nice and tidy and right in the centre. Although there's no highlight in the photograph, I am going to pop the tiniest of highlights in there just to make sure that our flamingo has a little bit of life. And then I'm going to make my way around the other aspects of the face. So we'll start with the iris of the eye and the shadows that occur in there. And we'll make our way around the kind of the rings where the feathers are very short and small, coming around the main features of the eye. Now we can start to break off into more interesting marks that depict feather shapes, but we want a little bit of contouring too. I'm looking at my photograph all the time, so let's extend that line out there. Looking forward to popping that in, and let's get into where the paler pink meets the richer pink. So coming down to the bottom, let's make some nice kind of scribbly feather marks up over the top of the head too. Flamingos have quite a smooth contour, but we don't want it to look too artificial. So we'll put some breaks in it here and there, and we'll put the odd little bit of texture so that when we put the background in, we don't have such a difficult time getting it to look realistic. So we're coming down there. I'm going to turn my paper ever so slightly to tackle this incredible bill. Let's go over the edge. So a nice smooth line there because the edges of the bill are just that, very smooth indeed. Coming down to the front, and then we've got a split where the end of the bill is black going into that rich pink. So let's get that in. And we've got folds where the bill opens up and they scoop up their feed. Got that kind of nostril going in. Let's get that with a little bit of shading as well. Going over, we probably want that to be a darker pink, so I won't do all of it. Put the edge of the nostril in. And then where the bill opens up, so again, we've got a smooth line coming down. One to go the other side of it, and the edges of the bill of a flamingo are serrated. And I want to give a bit of a nod to that. So I'm going to use my pen up and down with little short lines to show that there's a texture there. You can see it in the photograph. It doesn't go all the way up, the rest of it is quite dark. So let's make them join up so it's more like a shadow than anything else. This will save me a lot of time with getting the colour in. That works really well, but I think maybe it needs to taper out a little so that it doesn't end so harshly. That's better. Now the underside of the bill, which is where kind of all the skin gathers up, where it expands when it's feeding. And again, we've got that line where the pink goes into the black, which I want to break up. That's working really well. And all we've got really left to do is the underside of the neck. So we'll come in here, again, using some lines to break up, to smooth an edge, and we'll give a nod to the bottom of the body, but I am not really particularly concerned about this part of the flamingo. I want to concentrate the colour and the drama up at the top. Now, before we paint the flamingo, before I get the chance to use that incredible magenta colour, I do want to give this some drama. It would be very, very tempting to go for a pale background, maybe even a complementary pairing and give it a green background, but I love the photograph so much and the fact that it's got this very deep, rich background. So another colour in my watercolour collection is black iron oxide, and it's an interesting black because it has a very deep tone. You can make it very rich. You can alter it an awful lot with blue, which we're going to do later on in this demonstration, and it granulates as well. So we're going to be able to create an interesting background. I'm also going to try and make it a vignette at the same time to go for a soft edge and really get that kind of negative shape in so that that pink sings. So the things I'm going to need to create this background, I'm going to need a large brush, and for this I'm going to be using the SAA's Imitation Sable brush in a size 12. Here I've got my black iron oxide all squeezed out ready in a pan. This is the consistency of paint that I like. I don't particularly enjoy using it straight from the tube, and I don't like pans either. This is the Goldilocks principle where I can get exactly the richness that I require. I've got my pot of water. I've got a spray bottle too, which is going to be really important for getting those soft edges. And I've got a piece of trusty kitchen roll, which is where I'm going to start. I'm going to knock the texture out of this kitchen roll so that it doesn't transfer into the background when I soften the edges with it. So that's my security blanket. That's going to one side. Let's start. I'm going to spray the black iron oxide to make sure it's all ready to go. And then over on my painting, I'm going to do a kind of horseshoe shape of water. And what that does is buy me time. Actually, I'm going to pop a little bit down here as well. It buys me time so that when the black goes into that damp area, it's going to diffuse and I don't have to worry about any hard edges. So let's have the black in my hand. This is another reason for me liking it in this format. I can feed straight from here onto my painting. So I'll wet my brush. I will load it up with lovely rich colour, go over to my painting and be terribly brave and get that black in. But as soon as it hits the water, you can see that it diffuses, it becomes a paler colour, and it's going to work really well, I think. Now up over the top, let's reload my brush with colour. I'm being careful because I don't want it to splatter all over my surface. Let's again be really brave. I can tidy it up in a little bit, going into that water. Now here I've got to be careful because the end of the bill is black. So I don't want it to be quite so dramatic at that point. So I'm going to use a little bit of water. Let's take some of the excess off on the kitchen. Oh, I've splattered it. I knew I would. Let's soften that black where it meets the bill so that I can make it darker on my subject matter. Actually, I quite like the splashes. And let's take care of any of that extra colour over on the right hand side. Coming in underneath, there's some things that I need to take care of up at the top, but it will be okay. I'm working on dry paper here, so it's always going to be more dramatic on dry than on wet. Let's use the beautiful tip of this brush to feed that colour up into the edge of the flamingo. Coming down, let's use some water. Again, I don't want it to be too dark on the underside of that bill. So we'll use some water just to fuzz that colour out. And then coming down, I've got to work quite quickly now because I don't want it to dry and create shapes and lines that I'm not happy with. Let's come down and then we'll encourage it to run. So we'll add a little bit of extra water here so that it runs down the page and creates some dynamic marks. Then all of that is kind of taken care of and I don't have to worry. Now while it's still wet, I think I can afford to deepen some of the pigment up here. So let's add a little bit more back in, being very careful around the shape of the head, pushing that into the softer colour. Again, underneath I can probably afford to layer it up a bit more, deepen that rich colour. And I'm going to be very grateful when I come to put the pink on that I was that brave with it. So we'll make a few marks down here so that it evens it up and doesn't make it look too overpainted. And then when I'm happy with the application of the colour, pop those things down to one side. I can take care of any puddles or dampness that I don't like with my kitchen roll. So a light touch. I don't want to overdo it because I don't want to add too much texture or equally lift too much of that colour that I've just fought so hard to get on. So I'm kind of pressing lightly. I'm definitely not overdoing it. Let's put a tiny lift into there. Make sure that we've got it even on the paper. I'm going to do the wet paper dance, which is dashing backwards and forwards with my head to make sure that I've got no puddles, getting it into the light. And then very obviously, I need to let all of that dry very thoroughly before I can carry on to the next stage. My background is now all dry and I'm so pleased with how it's turned out. It looks dramatic and it looks textured and the paint has done all of the hard work for me. Now I'm itching to get the pink on this flamingo, but before I do that, I'm going to pop a tiny little bit of yellow into the eye so that can be drying whilst I'm manipulating the pink around the bird. So I'm going to choose a small brush. Let's go for something nice and controllable. Let's go for a size 2. And to get that yellow in, we're going to be using one of my other colours, which is Bees Gold. So straight in, let's just pick up my bit of kitchen roll and my size 2 brush, picking out some colour in there. It's surprising when you squeeze this yellow out, it looks far duller than it actually is. You wait until you see it on the paper. So I'm going to pop a little tiny bit in one corner and then I'm going to use some water to blend it out and you'll see what a lovely, fresh, zingy yellow it is. The perfect thing for this flamingo eye. We'll make it slightly deeper up at the top because in the photograph you can see that there's a shadow there. Also gives that little kind of extra dynamic quality. Perfect, that's exactly what I was looking for. Now we can go to that fantastic star of the show, that Quinacridone Magenta, and here it is, such a beautiful pink colour. Now if I was going to do a very accurate flamingo, let's bring that photograph in. There is an argument to say that I should probably mix the pink with a little bit of white, maybe some white gouache to create that very soft pink at the back of the flamingo's head. But actually, because this is just a quick sketch and an experiment, I'm only going to use a very pale version of it. Now, Quinacridone Magenta is a very, very bright colour indeed. And so I'm going to use this palette over here to pop some water down, pick up a tiny bit of that Quinacridone Magenta. Let's do it incrementally and get it, even though that looks very pale and wishy-washy, that is the colour that I'm going to use. I want the bill and the end and the eye to really stand out. So let's start with that. I'm going to wash some of this colour in. It's surprising the difference as to what it looks like on the palette and what it looks like on the paper. You can probably see there I manipulated the edge of that black with my brush to soften it a little bit. These colours lift very easily and they lift very easily on this watercolour paper too, which is Milford watercolour paper. And that's one of the primary reasons for me using this combination. I've left some white spaces on my paper. That is something that I do almost automatically now, but it certainly shows some texture. We're probably going to need to put some shadows back into this as well, but for the time being, it's going to be enough to get that pale pink down the back edge of my flamingo. Let's mop up the bottom so that it just runs into a vignette in the same way that the background has done. I'm going to pop that number 12 brush to one side and I'm going to switch to my number 6 brush now because I need to have more control over what I'm doing. So I'm going to be using the colour straight from the pan now and looking at that fabulous pink in the photograph. Let's load up my brush and start to manipulate it. I'm going to turn my paper ever so slightly so that I don't put my hand back into the wet paint. And let's start around the front of the eye. So I'm going to use my brush almost as if I'm drawing with it to drop in some lovely strong pink. Look at the quality of that colour. It's absolutely incredible. I think I'm falling in love with this colour just a little bit. And we're going to wash out the brush, take the excess moisture off on the kitchen roll, and then use the water to manipulate that colour around the rest of our shape. You can see now why I wanted to get the yellow in on that eye. So coming around, it's got variegation in it. It's not the same pink all over. But because this Quinacridone Magenta has such a strong tone, you can get deep, rich colours out of it, and you can get soft colours out of it too, as we have demonstrated on the back of the Flamingo. So we're coming down here, we've got a stronger line of colour in this section here before it hits the black. And we've got a stronger section in here as it comes towards the nostril. So I'm popping those in, and then I can use my water to smudge that colour around and manipulate it where I want it to go. If any of it is a bit on the strong side, I can use my kitchen roll to lift it out and to create texture too. I can't really hang around with this as my colour is wet and I want to be able to manipulate it. If I leave it too long, then I'm going to miss the opportunity to smudge it. But like I said, it is easy to lift out. So if for some reason you get distracted, it's not the end of the world. You can go back and move it around. So I've got that in there, got that in there. Let's go to town on the underside of this. I've got a slight pale line going in there. So let's pop that lovely strong pink down where it joins the black. Let's leave a bit of a line as it meets the centre of the bill and pull that colour around the shape. It's a bit too much water, so we'll move that a bit further, getting some colour in that way. I could always layer it up if the idea of using this stronger colour makes you nervous. These colours also glaze over the top of each other very easily too, so you could always apply one layer and add a richer layer over the top. Now, while that is still damp, I can work back into that shape to create some of the texture that is actually in the skin of the Flamingo where it's not got any feathers. So coming down the edge, I'm going to turn my page again, excuse me, and dot a tiny bit of that stronger colour. You can see it diffusing into the softer pink areas. Let's tidy up that edge. Coming down into this, we can probably strengthen that colour up a bit more. I'm being quite pernickety with this, but I think it's going to be worth it because we'll get that lovely texture going on. And then let's add a little bit of extra texture down here underneath to show the folds in the skin. Very subtle, but again, I think it's going to be worth it. Right, let's have a look. Yes. The only thing I haven't done is push that colour behind the eye. I think it could benefit from some stronger colour around the back. That's much better. And even though I am pushing my luck a little bit and going into now sort of semi-damp colour, let's do it anyway. Let's add a bit of extra over the back and get that blended out. That's better. Gives the eye a bit more continuity. So before I let that dry and have a really good look at it, we need to add the black on the bill. Now, do you remember me saying that I made this purposefully paler around so that I could be a bit more experimental with the depth of colour here? But I do want to alter it a little bit. So I'm going to take some black. I've got this puddle of pink over here, which is very pale. But into that, I'm going to add some black iron oxide. Let's get some nice rich colour going in there. I'm going to add a touch more of that Quinacridone Magenta. And then I'm going to add another one of my colours, which is cobalt blue. And I'm going to pop a little bit of that in there too. Should have wet this before. There we go, that's better. And get that in there. So we've got a sort of a purpley pinky black, which is not very technical, but should work. I have a feeling I'm going to need that to be darker, but let's see where we are with it. And let's get this painted in. Or maybe I don't need it darker. We'll see what happens when it dries. As with watercolour painting, you do need to allow your colour to dry to get a better idea of whether you've got the tonal value of it correct, whether it's deep enough. And I'm hoping that you can see you've got that lovely kind of rich pinky purpley black going on. It's a lovely colour. So we'll get the top of that done. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I'm going to need to make it darker, but that's all right. We'll let it all dry in a second and then we'll see where we are with it. And looking at my photograph all the time, Checking my tonal values, definitely need there to be a darker colour in there. But I'm loving this shade. Need to remember this mix for future paintings. And then let's get some of this colour joined up and in on there. I'm also going to pop a little bit of that colour in onto the eye, but I'm going to use a smaller brush for that because I want there to be some detail, because I'm loving that colour so much and it's kind of in keeping with all the rest of it. I'm going to switch to my number 2 brush, load it up with that colour, and then use it for some of the shadows around my eye. So a few little dots around into that pink. It's a much more subtle shadow colour than just black on its own. And we can get some lovely form going. But do you know what? I'm going to leave that to dry, and then I'm going to come back and finish it off with a few tiny touches. Everything's dry now, and I literally just need a few finishing touches. But I am so pleased with that shadow colour that I mixed up. I'm going to use it to add some texture just on the feather area of my flamingo, because I think it's going to break up that pink. I'm pretty happy with it. I could leave it as it is. I just think it could look a little bit better. So I'm going to go in with my number 12 brush again and pick up that colour, give it a little bit of a mix where the pigments are quite heavy, physically quite heavy. They do separate on the palette, so a quick stir means that they will come good again. And here and there, just at the top, it's going to look dark when I put it on, but I will do something to it in just a second. A few little flicks of shadow will help enormously into the water, and then use my damp brush to blend those around where I think they're going to be most useful. I can always take the extra moisture off on my kitchen roll. That looks better. Kind of breaks up the pink, stops it looking quite so flat. We need to continue it. Let's do it with a dry brush, so we're sort of dragging that colour around. I don't want to lose the brightness of it, but I think it did look a little too flat before. Let's do the same down the back edge. You can see actually on the photograph there is an underlying shadow. Let's bring that down. I think that will benefit. And again, just the hint of a smudge. Coming in and around, probably a bit too much. Let's lift it out with the kitchen roll just to prove to ourselves that it is easy to lift it out. And then that can come and disappear off into the vignette. That's actually a lot better. It's surprising sometimes how just a few adjustments to it gives it a very different look. Now the bill, I love the colour, but it does need to be deeper in places. So I'm going to go back to my size 6 brush, and I'm going to go back to my black iron oxide, and I don't want it to be black on its own, otherwise it will look very similar to the background. So I'm just going to add more black to this mix. Possibly a tiny touch more. That's better, that's more what I had in mind. Loading up my brush, rolling my brush in that colour, and then here and there, let's move my hand further down my brush so that I have a bit more control over it. I can put some extra detailing in to show how that bill is more variegated than I have done it. And I also want to add some depth into that section where you can see the serrated edge. I don't want to cover it up, I just want to deepen it. And I left it with a kind of white end, which I don't want. So we'll get rid of that too. There we go, a few little flicks of the brush to get it looking more variegated. And I think that looks loads better. What I will also do is tidy up this edge. I've got too much texture going on and it needs to be rounded. That's better, that's much better. Coming in at the back, and then as a final flourish, I need to deepen the shadow in the nostril, just in there, which I can do by adding that dark colour and just a damp brush to smudge it into the pink. And even though the black pen did a good job, I think that eye could be a touch deeper with the tiniest little addition, the very tip of my brush into the beady eye. And there you have my flamingo with that incredible pink Quinacridone Magenta.